Welcome to the Celebrity Estates Wills of the Rich and Famous podcast. In this podcast, we break down high-profile celebrity estate planning cases for advisors and their clients. Most celebrity estate catastrophes are based on the same issues that everyday people face, just with the volume turned up. Our goal is to identify and extract the individual estate planning issues that lie at the heart of each story. We then discuss what advisors should expect and how to avoid common pitfalls. Hosted by wealthmanagement.com senior editor David Lenok.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of wealthmanagement.com's Celebrity Estates, Wills of the Rich and Famous. For anyone new to the podcast, in each installment, myself and a guest take on a different celebrity estate and attempt to extract some key lessons that planners can apply to their more traditional clients. The idea being that celebrity estate planning catastrophes, although often ridiculous in their details, generally have at their cores very basic issues that can just as easily apply to non-famous or fabulously wealthy clients. Our guest this week is Douglas Boneparth. Douglas is the founder of Bone Fide Wealth, I see what you did there, a firm dedicated to providing both effective and relatable advice to the city's hardest working young professionals. Through his personal experiences with student debt, higher education, career development, professional achievement, and entrepreneurship, Douglas shares a perspective that very few financial advisors in the industry can. He then draws upon the real-life examples of his firm's clientele, offering financial solutions that are as creative as they are practical. Thanks for joining us, Douglas.
Thanks for having me.
So, the subject of this week's episode is the controversial and tragic musician Amy Winehouse. Amy was hailed as one of the world's most talented young songwriters in the wake of her debut album, Frank, in 2003. She was completely unique, with a personal style and sound that were throwbacks to the girls groups of the 50s and 60s, right down to the signature beehive hairdo. 3 years later, her follow-up album, Back to Black, won 5 Grammys and turned her into a global superstar. As is sadly so often the case, though, success didn't really agree with Amy. She spiraled into drug and alcohol addiction, with many fans blaming her hard-partying husband at the time, Blake Fielder Civil. They had a volatile relationship marked by drug use by both and a brief stint in prison for Fielder Civil. The pair eventually divorced after 2 years of marriage in July 2009. Fielder Civil reportedly got about $300K in the settlement. Though she managed to separate herself from Fielder Civil, Amy still had more than her fair share of demons, heroin addiction being the headliner, and she tragically died 2 years later of alcohol poisoning on July 23, 2011. She did not leave a will. Her after-tax assets of $3.64 million went to her parents Janice, 63, and Mitch, 68. Since Amy's death, the value of her estate is believed to have grown considerably from song royalties. A shooting star in life, she became a legend in death, with music fans buying 1.7 million copies of her albums in the first year after her death alone. And that's a truly ridiculous number because, can you remember the last time you purchased an album? Mitch and Janice used a chunk of the inheritance to set up the Amy Winehouse Foundation to help young musicians and people with addiction problems. Though, God forbid, the story ends on that semi-hopeful note, in 2019, 8 years after Amy's death, Fielder Civil reemerged with far fewer teeth and a $1.4 million legal claim against her estate. He claimed to have been with her during her most creative period and to be the inspiration for the hit song Back to Black. Despite his fairly dubious arguments, the case has yet to be adjudicated. Now, the issue with Amy Winehouse's estate is pretty cut and dry. Nobody expects to die at 27. Yet, even if it's somewhat unrealistic to expect someone that young to have a full estate plan, it's not too much to ask for them to be some sort of financial plan in general. Despite global megastardom, Amy Winehouse was only worth $3.64 million on her death. That math just doesn't add up to there being any sort of larger plan in place, though admittedly drug addiction can muddy those waters a bit. And Amy's not alone in her lack of a plan. The millennial generation is simultaneously the most talked about, sought after, and yet curiously underserved demographic in the financial planning industry. Douglas, what are some of the aspects that make millennial clients unique, and why do you think so many advisors are struggling to connect with them?
Great question. And it really just comes down to relatability. So there's this new generation, of young professionals, the millennials, who I don't know if they're, so young anymore. The oldest of the cohort getting into their late 30s, almost 40 years of age. We have kids. We have jobs that we've been at. in careers that we've established for 10 years. But nonetheless, I think our financial circumstances are very different than our parents and even our grandparents. And when you look at the financial planning profession, you look at the financial advice industry, if you will, you look at the demographics, you look at the statistics there, and you see that it does not look like an older millennial, and it certainly doesn't look like a younger millennial. It's your 60-something year old guy who likely began their career, if they've been doing it a while, in the brokerage era, making transactions, selling stocks. They were registered representatives. And that is just not what millennials are necessarily looking for when it comes to their financial lives. They want guidance and advice. You have an industry that's coming from a different position when they view what the needs are of potential clients versus what the needs are of my generation. And that's where I come in, right? So I picked up on that maybe six years ago, when you would get laughed at by any manager, any RIA, any bank, for saying I want to work almost exclusively with millennials. You'd get laughed at for that. And I said, well, I'm still going to play that game. I'm going to go long on that. And here we are.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the RIA thing, because I can actually track that evolution and the evolution of the publication that I work for. It started out as a registered representative, and then it got shortened to registered rep. You got to be hip, and then eventually it just became wealth management and wealthmanagement.com. As the years went on.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny that you can kind of track that same like parabola, I guess.
Yeah,
as you just described in sort of the name of the publication.
Yeah, that is so that is so in line with where the profession industry is at right now, with trying to figure out how to represent the financial advisor. And Reg BI, you had the CFP board recently remove the way that certified financial planners, of course, are compensated, right? There's no more, hey, are they fee only, fee based, commission only? That's gone. So here we are, almost how many years into this evolution, and we still can say, all right, you're this, you're that, this is what the fiduciary really is. It's a giant mess.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also one of the things that is kind of hard to put a finger on, at least as someone who works in financial media and kind of gets pitches on this a lot, is what the heck actually is a millennial, right? You're going to get talked about. I mean, I guess I'm
Right.
technically a millennial as well. We talk about it as like this monolithic kind of situation, but really it's like, I'm 37, I'm a millennial, and I'm pretty sure there's millennials who are as young as 20. So, I mean, and obviously we're at very different financial points in our lives.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up. And as a 35-year-old, certainly you and I are both older millennials. Could you only imagine the conversation that you would have with someone a decade younger than you? It's very different than like a 65-year-old having a conversation with a 55-year-old. Right. And look, there's just that much more time that has passed for them to relate to, while someone in their early 20s versus someone in their early to mid 30s are really coming from totally different planets. Like I cannot have a productive conversation with a 25-year-old who doesn't have kids, a mound of student loan debt, a mortgage to pay, is a decade into their career. And hey, that's no fault of their own. They're 25. I hope they're having a blast and figuring themselves out. I remember what it was like to be 25. So it's interesting how at this phase of millennialdom, there's such a great disparity between the younger folks in the cohort and the older ones, as opposed to, say, younger versus older baby boomers. I'm sure they're much more similar and can relate to one another, as opposed to millennials.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, someone who's 55 versus someone who's 65, they're both sort of one is kind of seeing his retirement plan come to realization while the other is kind of putting it
They're
together. But
they're
that's
both,
not such a different
yeah,
place as I just got out of college versus I've been working for 15 years.
they're both probably booking, cruises for next
Yeah.
fall.
Hopefully not, but we'll see.
I'm kidding.
But so what can an advisor do then? I mean, for our audience, obviously you can't just magically make yourself younger. So if I do want to appeal to this generation and I do want to try to communicate or find millennial clients or at least meet them as much as halfway as I can, me being the hypothetical 50-year-old white guy financial advisor,
Hmm.
like what can I do that won't be like ridiculous and like hello fellow kids, you know?
Did you just do the Steve Buscemi meme there?
Yes, it was.
Okay, I appreciate that. It's a fantastic question, and I'm not here to tell any um, any veteran advisor, any older advisor, that they need to do something that's not, natural to them. Like if you are good at getting your, fellow boomer in the door, with the rollover and the need for, some really good retirement planning and estate planning, like focus on that. Like that's clearly what you should continue to do. But if you're also interested in making sure that your practice survives 20, 30 years from now, you 100% need to focus and concern yourself with, to some extent, bringing in those younger clients. And if you're not the person to do it, then I think it really, goes to someone that you could hire, your associates, if you have, and I hate this term, a junior advisor. So real quick, don't use that term. But if you have younger associates and financial advisors in your practice, empower them. Low hanging fruit, the children of your existing clientele. Have them grab a beer or a glass of wine while you're meeting with the parents, not to discuss anything financial in their lives. That just seems weird and cheesy. Just go get to know them, right? Go have your associate get to know the children of your clients, and let them know that if they have any questions, the practice is there for them. I mean, that's literally a layup. And then it goes all the way to the harder side of things, of actively marketing towards the generation. And again, someone in that cohort, a fellow millennial, is going to have an easier time marketing to millennials than a baby boomer down to millennials. I get it, and I'm not here to try and tell you need to put a square peg in a round hole, but there are plenty of ways to do this. Again, I think the best way is through younger associates or younger advisors, empowering them and giving them what they need, and understanding that it's likely a long runway. Like, you need to remember that if they're focusing on someone in late 20s and 30s, I mean, this is a pretty dynamic time in people's lives. So I get it. It's hard. It's an investment, to really hope that you bear fruit over 5, 6, maybe 7 years. But that's the best way to do it. And if you are so fortunate to have the skill set, as someone in their 40s, 50s, 60s, to go reach down into the 20 and 30-year-old, arena and get clients from that, more power to you. It's not impossible, but it's improbable.
Yeah, I particularly like this idea of empowering the younger associates, younger advisors in your firms, because there's no shortage of them. Let's be honest, and they're all sort of waiting for a chance to do something, and this is so they can get on the job training here also by sort of, hey, working with not yet clients but kind of halfway clients, and
Yeah.
it's sort of like a nice in between where they're not going to really mess anything up necessarily, but they can kind of cut their teeth
Well,
in
that's
dealing
the
with
rub.
clients.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, though, and this now kind of has me a little triggered in a way to, once again have to point out on a podcast that I think the biggest issue for young advisors, and don't know if this is the direction we wanted to go, but the biggest issue is that they're not being put into a training or recruitment model that understands that you need a considerable amount of time to mature as a person, right? Like you can't be 23 and 24 and expect to build this robust book of clients that, has the right margin, that brings in the right kind of revenue. So this is me throwing somewhat, of shade at this sales culture that still exists in the profession, in the industry. And it's got to go. And that's, me just saying, oh, it's got to go isn't easy. The hardest part about being an advisor, regardless of your age, is business development, is getting relationships in the door to provide financial planning and financial advice services, and then asset management and product related type stuff. And if you think here in 2020 you can just bring a 23, 24-year-old into your practice and get that in 2, 3, 4 years, you're kidding yourself. And that sets up a whole kind of different dynamic than what once was and what needs to be. And I think that playbook is still being written. And I think the best firms are the ones who figured that out.
Yeah, and I think that's instructive. I mean, even though you took it in that direction, it's instructive of why they're struggling to connect with millennials as well, because it's one and the same problem, right? In that, a lot of times they if a millennial person comes in, they kind of get offhandedly rejected because they're not really coming in with tons of assets, or they're not coming in with the sort of questions that these advisors are used to dealing with, where it's like, oh, what can I put you in? They're coming in asking about their credit rating or their student loan, debts. Advisors are more used to helping parents set up, accounts for their kids' college, not helping their kid pay off his, you know what I mean? And so these are the same problems that they have with training the young advisors. The idea that a millennial client, a lot of the times, unless you strike gold with one of the Henrys, which is one of my least favorite acronyms in all of finance, but it's someone who it's a client you're investing in, right? Like someone who's not gonna be you're not gonna make a ton of money off of for quite a while.
Yeah, I mean that's the heart of my story. I was sitting in business school at night, in my late 20s at NYU, trying to figure out, number one, securing this degree as, a fail safe, that if I wasn't able to build my own practice, that I could at least go work for a private bank and have some pedigree and live a nice life and, do what I love to do. But I probably wouldn't be the entrepreneur I consider myself today in growing and building what I've built. But it was at that moment I looked around and said, okay, here's the long game I'm going to play. I'm going to invest in my classmates, in my peers. That's where the whole impetus to start Bone Fide Wealth came from. But to digress, what I think is one of the more interesting conundrums, if not dynamics, that comes with a new approach to recruitment and training young advisors, and this is especially true for small firms or solo practitioners, is the amount of trust that both parties need, from the hiring advisor to the associate. You're dealing with a 23-year-old, right? So take it from the view of the advisor in their 50s or 60s, and they want to get let's say it's a solo, they want to get a succession plan. They really want this to work out, so they have a retirement plan of their own, and now they need to invest. They're being asked to invest 5 to 10 years into a 22, 23-year-old, and maybe they've never been a manager in their life. They're not super relatable to that person, but they got to figure out a way to have them and incentivize them and train them in such a way that they want to stick around that long. And then you have, from the perspective of that 23, 24-year-old, right, who is arguably flaky and figuring themselves out, they need to be invested enough into that person that just hired them to say, yes, this is, something I ultimately want to continue doing. And I can see how I get from, being 24 to 32 and having a piece of this practice and feeling like an owner. And that dynamic right there, first of all, no one talks about that enough, but no one really, I think, recognizes, or at least it needs to be recognized, how inherently difficult that is. And because it's so difficult is primarily why, it's so difficult to recruit in this new era of the industry.
Yeah, I mean, that has to be a very intentional process. I think there's a lot of you think that they'll think of step one, like, oh, we'll have this to attract the young advisors, and then they'll be like, and then they'll get into our firm culture and it'll be great. And then there's no like middle, like they skip the whole middle step.
Yeah,
where they're getting that buy-in,
You're talking about firm culture when we're talking about a solo practice. Yes, for the smaller ensemble practices, but you're talking about firm culture it's a solo practitioner, right? Let's take it down to that level. Like there's no culture. The culture is that person themselves and the way they behave. And they're coming from typically well, I've built this myself, my way, doing it like this. This is how it's going to be. You should replicate that. And it's like, that was 1991. Like, chill with that. My wife, and I have to commute every day, in and out of a city, or it's just not like that anymore, right? I can't pick up the phone and cold call my way to 10 million in assets under management in 2 years. Get out of here.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so interesting how, as someone who writes about estate planning primarily, when I talk about succession planning and when financial advisors talk about succession planning, it's two different things, but it's a very parallel track in a way, because you kind of see the same problems where you have sort of the wealth creator or whatever. In this case, it's the business creator. And he's put his whole life into this thing, and now he's looking at some dumb kid who he's got to pass it off to, and just like he can't fathom.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up, and not to just keep and look, there's bias here. Like I am for the most part a solo practitioner with one staff here, so these issues come up all the time. I mean, here we are helping our clients, deal with their own financial circumstances and providing them with solutions, specifically in the estate planning area. And as solo practitioners ourselves, we can often struggle here. So it's always interesting to see how helpful we are to our clients who have the ability to execute on the advice, but we ourselves, at least as small business owners, might struggle here as well, or just struggle here. So interesting point.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of the reason that, like, the old adage that, advisors' books of business look a lot like they do. It's that because what's you're interested in and what you're worried about, you're going to naturally pay more attention to, and you're going to be drawn and be more invested in the clients.
Well, that's the
that
thing.
Are going through the same thing,
Yeah, 100%. And that's the thing here. Like what I've done in terms of building a practice around my peers is literally no different than the advisor 30 years my senior who built their entire practice, if they've been around that long, around their peers. Is what you naturally do. That's the same. That will continue to be true, I think, for anyone building a quote unquote book of business in a service industry. But what's drastically changed is, the product offering, right? You're no longer saying, hey, Dr. Smith, you got to get into, IBM and Microsoft, and then you hit them up with the stocks they've never heard about, right? And that was literally like your business. That's the brokerage day. And then somewhere between then and now, you were like, all right, well, here's this thing called financial planning and advice. So, full disclosure, I'm the son of a certified financial planner. My father started when financial planning was almost brand new, but he had recognized that was really where the value was. And that was the way that if you are going to sell stuff, like that's the best way to go about doing it. That, an engineer by trade knows, what the path of least resistance looks like. So he picked up on that, and, that's been instilled in me. But yeah, that's, I think, somewhat of the huge difference is that you have young, and here we are still talking about advisors and whatnot, but you have young advisors who need to go out there and talk about financial planning and advice, and not something that's product related. And there's a huge disconnect there between, again, older advisors and younger advisors. And that translates into having to go out and get, younger clients versus older clients. It's what they remember and what they know about what we do as professionals.
Absolutely. So I guess we can bring it back to the clients a little bit now, even though I enjoy the advisor talk.
Yeah, sure.
But sort of what are like, we're looking at sort of the issues that are different for a millennial client. And again, talking about the generation like that is makes things a little difficult.
Mm-hmm.
But like sort of when an advisor has to look that I have to offer different services effectively to these people, for lack of a better way of putting it, than I would for my more typical client in a different way. So what does that necessarily, it's not going to be the same for every advisor or every client, but kind of vaguely, what does that look like?
Yeah, it's, again, another really, really good question. So you got this relatability function here, the fact that you can actually understand what they're going through in their lives relative to what you're going through. And not to sound almost cliche millennial on this, but there's a certain experience, right? There's an experience that they're having that you are having as well. And you then link those experiences to the areas of financial planning that are most relevant here. And there's, for folks that are starting out and just starting their family or getting married, like estate planning isn't really the depth of advice that you can offer. It's more like check the box, like, hey, you just got married or you're having a kid, you need to go see the attorney and get these, basic estate planning documents drafted. All right, go check the box. But when it comes to mastering cash flow, right, and creating the systematic savings, to build that solid foundation for their financial life for the next 20, 30, 40 years, like that's some work. That's some work you got to put in there to lay that all out and build them up over the course of the next few years. Like literally bringing them from now, where your money goes. We have to build a cash reserve. We have to max out those retirement plans. We've done all that. Oh my God, we did that in 18 months. Great. Let's create the systematic savings and the dollar cost averaging strategies to now save above and beyond, what we can put away in retirement accounts and 9 to 12 months of cash, for an emergency. Okay, now we got to go buy a home. Oh, you had a kid. All right, let's revisit that plan again. I think it's just, it is probably the most dynamic time in one's life, your 20s and 30s. The only thing that comes close to that is probably retirement and helping people transition from workforce to, and even the definition of retirement's changing here, but whatever the notion of financial independence is for that individual, that's probably, and I think it pales in comparison to just how dynamic the stage of life that I advise on is.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think one of the key elements there, and I think also in retirement, actually, this is a key element as well, is the fact, the idea of the advisor as sort of educator as well as advisor, where you're not just sort of moving things around and sending them a statement. You kind of have to take them and
Yeah.
sit them down and hold their hands and like, hey, not only am I doing this and realizing this needs to be done, but I need to explain to you and have you understand why we're doing this and why it needs to be done and why, what I'm doing is important.
Yeah. And again, I'm not like here to say that they're, that all older advisors are, only asset managers. I know so many amazing planners who lead with financial planning, across all ages of the profession of advisors and planners. But you can't ignore the fact that, most financial advisors are really more serving the investment advisor function than they are the financial planning function. I just don't think too many people would argue that point. So again, when you're leading with, even though it's not a commission based model anymore, if you're an AUM investment advisor focusing on, generating returns in, as the primary and the secondary being, well, is this linked to the retirement plan and the holistic financial plan? I mean, I think that's just what we have more of.
Absolutely. And then I didn't mean to imply that, older advisors are all, doing less work or anything. It's just the idea of educating somebody in their 40s is they naturally are going to have less to learn than somebody in their 20s. They're going to have some life experience, presumably, that hopefully makes the advisor's job a little easier.
100%. I mean, you might have a lot of audacity to be like, 55 yourself and talking to a 52-year-old and be like, look, let's, so I'll take this two ways. Like, let's go.
Let me teach you. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me teach you a thing about how you're spending your money. It's just like, excuse me, I've been, spending money for 30 years and I've gotten to this point in my life and I think I'm doing all right. And it gets all weird and awkward. That's on one hand. Interestingly enough, on the other hand, I have with brand new retirees said, look, this is going to sound crazy. I know you've gotten to this point. This is a super success that you've made it to being able to retire. But what if I asked you to track your expenses for the next 12 months? Like, what? You want me to create a budget? You want me to track and reconcile cash flow? And it's like 100%. Let's go right back to the most fundamental thing possible, because here we've been talking about, living a certain lifestyle during retirement and all these years of financial planning that we've done together. And this is the first year you're actually living that lifestyle. So why don't we actually see, what that is in dollar values? And that's connected. And I'm thinking of one particular client where it was 1 year after engaging, I gave that recommendation, and sure enough, here comes a spreadsheet from a 70-year-old outlining everything they had spent their money on in the past 12 months. And wouldn't you know, it was a little less than what we were thinking would be the lifestyle expense during retirement. And that was awesome. So, on one hand, you don't want to necessarily tell, someone who's been doing something a certain way for so long, or trying to, educate them at that stage of their life. And then, as I just demonstrated, it wasn't so much education. It was, hey, let's see this through. Let's make sure this is right. And if that's education, fine.
Well, it's sort of like a back to basics idea, right? Like, we've piled so much complication onto this over the years that we've sort of buried the very initial premise.
You finished the book
that we started with. Yeah.
You finished the book. Let's go pick it. Let's go. What do? Let's
read it again.
Yeah, exactly. You go back to chapter 1. Let's see what we missed.
Well, Douglas, this has been fantastic. We're starting to run out of time here, but I'd really like to thank you for coming on and being such a great guest.
Oh, thank you for having me. My pleasure.
And for all the listeners, I'll see you, or I guess you'll hear me, on the next episode of Celebrity Estates.
Thank you for listening to the Celebrity Estates Wills of the Rich and Famous podcast. Click the subscribe button below to become notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of InformaWealthManagement.com. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.